Severe thunderstorm by tomorrow afternoon. That could bring some flash flooding. A high tomorrow, 91. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
78 at O'Hare. Next news, 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM.
Dan and Amy, and continuing our discussion of COVID, but from a different angle than we discussed with Dr. Harvey Risch from Yale. Lives versus lives. What do we find? We find on the deaths of despair front, CDC data suggests that 1 in 4 young people have had suicidal thoughts during the pandemic to date. Mm-hmm. For comparison, that's less than 6% of young people, same age cohort, harbored similar thoughts a decade early, according to older CDC data. So, 1 in 4 is not usual.
No, overdose deaths in just DuPage County up 56% from last year. Same time.
More than 40% of respondents said the crisis had prompted mental health or behavioral problems. The overdoses nationally.
How bad is it?
NPR reports that overdoses nationally have spiked about 18%. To give you an order of magnitude, in 2018, more than 67,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. So an 18% increase. Well, that's another, 12,000 dead if you go off the 67,000 number. Now, again, that's not necessarily all attributed to COVID-19. It's difficult to extract that all out. But when you see a considerable spike and you see the overriding variable that can reasonably be inferred to be impactful, then it needs to be addressed, doesn't it? And there were studies like the one at the Wellbeing Trust at the outset or during the height of the outbreak that suggested we could see upwards of 70 to 75,000 excess deaths of despair because of the lockdown policies. Remember, this doesn't include the impact of the unemployment rate, particularly extended unemployment. We find from a study done by economists from Indiana University and Ohio State, 60% of the layoffs they attribute to lockdown policies. And we know from a long trail of studies on unemployment rate, the increase in the suicide rate with every 1 percentage point increase in the unemployment rate. And that doesn't contemplate people who have had their lives or livelihoods significantly impacted by rioting to add to the COVID-19 lockdown policies. So, thinking about that, thinking about all of that, this piece over at the Skeptical Inquirer, which was quite interesting, The Tyranny of Now, right? We, and also, we want the answer right now. If it's nuanced, we want to understand on which side we should err. And then something that isn't exactly tackled in the piece, and then we sort of cling to whatever we decided to do at the outset. Even while the so-called experts who we've ceded so much of our lives to are moving all over the place on therapeutics, on vaccine timelines, on mask usage, and mask usage within different cohorts as well as across the board, on what can and can't open, about who decides what can and can't open, about what the thresholds are for closing once you've opened something.
Well, Governor Pritzker, I asked him too. I said, what's the threshold for opening in-person learning in Chicago or in the state of Illinois? What positivity rate do we have to be at? No answer, because he doesn't have an answer. The plan is there is no plan.
And yet people just cling to, in some cases, the abundance of caution mantra that leaves you paralyzed in place. Yeah. It's really a disquieting thing.
Well, we're not living, we're existing, and it's got to stop.
It's a disquieting thing if you want to return to some semblance of the fuller life I think most people were enjoying prior to COVID-19. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Stuart Vyse. He is the author of the piece I was referencing. He's a psychologist. He's also the author of Believing in Magic, The Psychology of Superstition, and Going Broke, Why America Can't Hold On to Their Money. Well, in part because I think government's got their hands on it. Maybe that's part of the answer. Stuart Vyse, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
When you're writing about the tyranny of now, you go through sort of how you approached this from the outset of the awareness of the outbreak back in March. And so, give us your personal journey to, inform your perspective as we stand here today at the end of August and how it evolved over those intervening 6 months.
Well, I think it's a situation where we did need to look forward, for example, to schools. I mean, there's all this attention now on being able to get kids back into school for obvious reasons. That would be tremendous. But I don't think we focused on those factors that would really bring the infection rate down and make people more comfortable with doing that. I mean, we're kind of in the middle of a perfect free market experiment where, as long as the virus is something that's a part of our lives and is increasing as it is in Illinois and other places, people are just not going to behave the same way. And if we had taken a harder, quicker approach, I think we would be in a much better place now. That's sort of the way I see it.
Well,
now.
you had mentioned you wrote that bars and restaurants open before schools. Would you have done that differently?
I think that. I mean, I'm wondering. I mean, I think there may be people in hindsight who will say that maybe we should have done it differently. Yeah. I mean, it's also the situation that a lot of places have done a better job of getting rid of the virus, and they don't have to ask these questions. I mean, I heard your earlier lead-in about all the deaths of despair and so forth, and that is really very serious and true. But other places don't have to make a choice between COVID deaths and deaths of despair because they're beyond it. They're returning to normal life. They are putting their kids in school with some success, and when outbreaks happen, they jump on them and deal with them as quickly as they can. So that's what I mean, is that I don't think we put in the work early on that we needed to do in order to be more comfortable now.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, early on, what did we do? We leapt and then looked. And that's usually not an approach that you take to problem solving. Let's jump and then figure out where we are in the air. That's what we did with lockdown policies. And that's what we did with this sort of 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now it's something else. Now it's something else. Now it's something else. Now it's something else for 6 months. And you're right about the free market approach. I mean, thank goodness, for example, there is a Sweden to compare and contrast with the rest of Western Europe and the rest of the Western world. Thank goodness there's a Georgia just even in the last 4 weeks to compare with the reaction when cases spiked in Georgia, Florida, Arizona, Texas to what Florida, Arizona, and Texas did, and California, versus what Georgia did and where they are now 4 weeks later. And again, there's still so much we don't know going forward. Some places that look like they're stable now can be unstable very quickly. So it just seems to me that what you have right now is sort of the, you call it the tyranny of now. That's part of it. It's the tyranny of experts and the cession, the ceding of one's autonomy to experts that are in many cases in disagreement with one another, and in other cases are just as involved in the search for answers and just as lost in that search as laymen are in the body politic.
Yeah, I agree that it's a confusing message. I obviously put more faith in experts than perhaps you do, but it's true that COVID is all new, and science is an iterative process. We don't make it doesn't work the first time. That's the word experiment, means that you have to try and see if it's going to work. And so I think that we are in a situation where we're all learning how to do this, and there is no clear path. I do think that it's unfortunate that it's been so politicized. I mean, I heard your earlier guest make the analogy to a hurricane. It is that. No one politicizes a hurricane. It's a hurricane. And this is a plague, and I think that we are weakened by the fact that we are so divided over this issue and can't come together. And you mentioned Sweden. Sweden is an extremely unified country. They tend to trust their government. They had 93% compliance with the health guidelines in Sweden. We're not getting that here.
Well, they didn't have extreme lockdowns like we did. And they're not a mass culture,
didn't.
but they're also a healthy culture. And nobody seems to talk about that, about the obesity rate in America. We're not healthy like the Swedes or the people in Holland or in Finland or in
There
Norway.
Are many factors. That's right. And but Sweden closed their high schools and their universities, shut them all down, and they have had a higher death rate. I mean, everybody's doing this a little differently, and that's the way it undoubtedly will be. But I just think it's a shame that we didn't try to make a stronger effort early, because by now we might be in a much better position. And I also heard you mention the Economist study. There's a study right at University of Chicago that shows that most of the economic hit that we've taken from COVID is not from the lockdown orders; it's from people's behavior.
Wow.
That people are not going to come back to movie theaters. They're not going to go on cruise ships. They're not going to do all these things until they feel safe.
Yes, yes. But that I'm familiar with that study. But it's difficult to extract the psychological effect that the government instituting lockdowns has on people's behavior to then say if it's serious enough for the government to lock down bars and restaurants and basically the outside, then that's going to inform how I behave regardless of what they say next. Because now you've got me scared.
Sure.
Maybe we could start. Do a reset. How about any politician? I don't care their party, who says, listen to the science and follow the data, is imprisoned for life. How about that? As just a way to say you can't get away with refrigerator magnet pronouncements like that. We have to talk about the specifics, and we have to acknowledge mistakes that were made. Well, by the way, maybe one of the reasons the Swedes trust their government a little bit more is because the Swedes came out and said, you know what, we could have done a better job with nursing homes. Too many people died in our nursing homes because we didn't take the precautionary measures that we should have. Acknowledging wrongdoing. We can't get Andrew Cuomo to acknowledge that his sending infected patients back into New York, as other governors did as well. 6,000 is one estimate. He won't allow for any auditing to be done because he doesn't want this to be political, for goodness sakes. That's what breeds mistrust in government and mistrust from the experts that are providing cover for the politicians who return the favor.
I agree completely. I mean, I think that there have been a lot of places where mistakes have been made and not owned up to. And that is part of the process. I mean, that's why, for example, there are retractions from journals.
Yeah.
And there are differing opinions. It's an iterative process. You have to do the work and figure out what the truth is. And I totally agree with you. I think that politicians should be honest about mistakes they make, as well as scientists. And I'm sure that is part of the reason why the Swedes trust their government more.
And the expectation game too. You discuss this in your piece, and I appreciate that. And this is again across the board. That I don't want mindless happy talk, and I don't want apocalyptic nonsense either. And you write, one of the most frustrating aspects of the fight against SARS-CoV-2 has been the imposition of substantial changes in our lives, only to have to wait for weeks to see any benefit of our sacrifices. If you control expectations and look, I'm not an omniscient being, and neither are these people. We know something. We've studied this a lot. We've got some ideas that are rooted in sound thinking and the science as we understand it at present. And here's what we're going to do. Here's our hope. And you're going to have to come along the way. And then 4 weeks from now, we're going to stop, look, and listen, understand if it's effective. And if it's not effective, we're going to make a course correction. And if it is, that we're going to see where we're at and see if we need to continue on the course we're on. If you had three-dimensional human beings speak to people like adults, maybe we would do a better job, generally speaking.
Totally agree. That's more honesty, more forthright presentation of what we do and don't know, I think can only breed trust and cooperation from people who are being asked to sacrifice so much.
He is Stuart Vyse. He's a psychologist, author of Believing in Magic, the Psychology of Superstition, and Going Broke, Why Americans Can't Hold On to Their Money. Stuart Vyse, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Honey, what are we going to do with your grandparents' old coins and jewelry?
I'm pretty sure they're worth some money.
You've been saying that for years.
Okay, how about PGS Gold and Coin? They're the best when it comes to selling family valuables.
And you know this because...
PGS. When it comes to your valuables, they're the best.
Isn't that the place Jeff sold his grandmother's jewelry when she passed?
Yep. He checked out pgsgoldandcoin.com and found tons of positive reviews. He was blown away by how much he got. Do you? Oh, you're already on the site.
Almost. pgsgoldandcoin.com.
PGS Gold and Coin, the upscale way of selling your coins, jewelry, diamonds, and collectibles. Family owned and operated for over 10 years. Rated A+ by the Better Business Bureau with 3 Chicagoland locations, and they make house calls. PGSGoldandCoin.com or 888-416-2701. That's PGSGoldandCoin.com or 888-416-2701.
PGS. When it comes to your valuables, they're the best.
Tell 'em AM 560 sent you.
Balance of nature. Changing the world